Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Knife Chats with Tobias. I think it is safe to assume that I have been one of the harshest critics of the Slant R bolster or Big R bolster, whatever you want to call it, that you find on Rough Ryder knives these days. Wasn't always a major critic of it, but I definitely turned into a major critic of it. I think they usually refer to it as a Slant R bolster, which is interesting because most of the time it's not slanted, or it doesn't seem to be that way, but you do see it on some slanted bolsters with the R, such as on the Brown Stagbone series with the Slant R bolster in this case. And obviously I have been one of those people who've been yelling and screaming, I wish they'd just get rid of that stupid R on the bolster. But I wasn't always that way, because the first time I actually saw the R on the bolster was with the Classic Carbon series, and this was a series of knives that I won in a contest from Smoky Mountain Knife Works. I won the entire series at the time. At that moment, the Barlow had not been entered into the series, but I actually talked a little bit, I think, in the video about, hey, that's kind of interesting. They got a big R on the bolster, and I thought the R was going to be part of the Classic Carbon series. That's where you were going to find it, just on the Classic Carbon knives. And at that point, I wasn't really upset with it. It wasn't like my favorite design or anything like that, but it wasn't awful. And I, as something that would set that series apart from other Rough Ryder knives, I thought that was pretty cool. You got the Classic Carbon diamond shield, and then you've got the R bolster. So with that in mind, I thought, oh, that's not bad. You know, you'll be able to spot the Classic Carbon series right away with that R on the bolster. And, you know, and they were really nice knives. T10 carbon steel, the half stop, the swedges, everything else. I mean, they were really decked out, and they were really nice knives in the yellow comp handle. And so the R was just something that went with the series, and I thought that was okay. And then the next thing I noticed is the R started showing up on all sorts of knives, and then it became more problematic to me because, you know, as a symbol for a series, I did not have a major issue with the R on the bolster. It's when it became something that was just prevalent on every Rough Ryder knife that it became kind of over the top and annoying. So does that make sense to folks? I mean, it isn't so much that I had an issue with it, because I've got plenty of knives with decorated bolsters and stuff. And when it's a series of knives that have a bolster, a specific bolster for that series, I have no problem with it, because, you know, it kind of makes the series. It's something that sets the series apart. For instance, the Shamrock bolsters in the Stroke of Luck series, that's the only place you see these with a Rough Ryder knife, is in the Stroke of Luck series. The Crown series that you see, Crown bolsters you see in the Stonework series, it's rarely used. You know, you've got the double ring and a crown, and it's something that you don't see often in Rough Ryder knives. Primarily, it was reserved for the Stonework series. Now, this series, the shell or the sunburst bolsters that you have in the saw cut bone series, it's used in a few other series, but it is relatively uncommon, and that's what I was expecting with the R. I wasn't expecting it to show up everywhere. Even with the dog bone jack, you rarely see triple rings on a Rough Ryder knife. And again, one that is only used with one series of knives, the Brian Yellow Horse Arrowhead series of knives. That bolster is only found on those knives, and that's kind of what I was expecting with the Big R. I wasn't expecting it everywhere. I was expecting it on the Classic Carbon series, but apparently it had already been showing up on other Rough Ryder knives This is the first place that I noticed it being used, but it had been used earlier and it has been used ever since almost. But what I was used to with Rough Rider knives was the single ring bolster, or the single threaded bolster, whatever way you want to call it. And that's really what I expect to see in a Rough Rider knife. I wasn't expecting to see such a dramatic change with the R showing up everywhere. And that's literally what happened. They started putting the R on every knife being made, with very few exceptions. For instance, you don't find the big R in the Rough Rider Reserve series. It wasn't used on the upswept bow trapper, and obviously it is also not used in the micarta work knife. And we know these two knives are very popular and sold out really quickly, and I wonder if some of these other knives would have sold out a little faster if they were lacking that big R. And we'll find out when Rough Rider finally retires the big R, and I do know that is going to be happening. They might be in the process now. Okay, now what this video, as the title said, is it's some of my big R's that I plan on keeping, because there's quite a few of the knives that I have that have big R's that I have no intention of keeping. I will either be giving them away or I will be selling them in the very near future, because I just I'm tired of the R, and maybe it'll help somebody else fill out a collection or something like that. For the most part, I have bits and pieces here of knives with the big R on it, because there were series that I might have bought all of if it wasn't for the big R. But for the most part, it was like, I'll buy that one and that's it. Now, like I think I've already mentioned, this was the classic carbon series of Rough Rider knives with the T10 steel and everything. And I have the entire series because it was given to me in I won it in a contest, and later picked up the Barlow, which was not part of it. So I have this entire series, and that's going to be my representation for the big R, that one series. Beyond that, I doubt I will have an entire series of anything that happens to have the big R on it. However, there's a couple patterns that I really like, and so I will keep those knives simply because I collect that pattern. And as you can see, I've got the other 4-inch toothpick here. Actually, I think it's more like a 4 1/8 inch toothpick. This is 4 1/8 inch toothpick in the Black Widow series. And I really like this one. I bought this one actually before I got this knife, but I really did not even notice the R. That's how it ended up being, because I was looking at everything else, the Black Widow and everything else, and the nice blade edge going on. Pretty cool blade edge. And so I really like this, and I've got every medium toothpick by Rough Rider, and I'm collecting all of the medium toothpicks by Rough Rider. So this knife is obviously going to stay in my collection, despite it having the big R on it. And that moves us over to this other knife right here, which is the High Plains series large toothpick. And this one works a whole lot better than several of the other knives I have here, in that it doesn't have a shield, which helps a little bit, so that you don't have over branding on the knife, because now you have the R on the bolster. There's no blade edge going on, and there's no shield. So from an outward appearance, when the knife is closed, the only thing that really tells you that this is a Rough Rider knife is the R on the bolster. I would have preferred it without the R, but it's not as annoying to me, simply because otherwise the knife is really clean. There's nothing else going on with it. And the fact that when I put this with the other 5 or 6 Rough Rider toothpicks that I have, this is the only one that has the big R on the bolster. It kind of sets it apart from the other ones. And the other Rough Rider toothpicks, as you can tell, also have different kinds of bolsters and stuff. So that's one of the things that I like about that series of toothpicks, or that pattern by Rough Rider. Every pattern is slightly different. The bolsters are different, or there's a different kind of blade edge on it. The bone is different and everything else. So it kind of sets them apart. And so when you look at it as a group, it looks good even with the big R. So that toothpick and any other large toothpick that Rough Rider comes out with, I'm going to grab simply because this is a pattern I collect, and I make a conscious effort to pick up all of the Rough Rider large toothpicks. The good news is they just don't make that many of them, so it's easy to buy them, and it's also easier to accept the big R on the bolster because it's a knife that I really like. And you see back here, I've got 3 of the Cub lockbacks that have R's on the bolster. This one is in the titanium. This one is in the brown stag bone. I will definitely keep this one because of it being in brown stag and it being a Cub lockback. Those are the 2 main reasons. I could have done without the R or the Federal shield on that. That shield really does not belong on this knife. Neither does this one. Because it's such a small knife to begin with, and when you have the shield and the R, you're talking about lots of billboarding. The one where it doesn't seem as annoying is right here on the Copper Swirl series. I wish if they would have done this in the Celestial, I would have picked it up also, even with the big R. Partly because there's no other billboarding, and mainly because it is a Cub lockback, and I really like these knives. So those are safe. I'm definitely going to be keeping all of my Cub lockbacks because I just like the pattern. But this is the only Copper Swirl I have, and I think this is the titanium series. I have one other knife in the titanium series. I do not know if it has the big R on the bolster or not. I had to pause for a moment and go grab the knife real quick, and it does indeed have the big R on it. It's actually a reverse Slant R bolster, which is kind of different. It would have been better if it was just a reverse slant bolster without the R, but it also has a unique shield. To date, this is the only Rough Rider knife that has the double R nickel silver shield. So that was pretty cool to find out and see. And it's a cotton sampler, which is also pretty cool. And so this knife I'm definitely keeping, but I'm keeping in spite of the R on the bolster, and I bought it in spite of the R on the bolster because of the double R shield and because of being a really pretty looking knife. This side looks a little bit better, but I like that speckle. The bone looks really great on this side. The bolster looks better on this side. In any case, that knife is going to be safe, and I will definitely be keeping it mainly because of the double R shield, though. So I'm keeping it, like most of these knives, I'm keeping it in spite of the big R. Let's go on to the next knife, and that is the black and blue series knives. They got the black liner underneath of the blue bone, the blue saw cut bone, and that is some of the prettiest bone that Rough Rider has ever put on a knife, and that is why I bought this knife. One of the primary reasons I bought it, and I figured I could live with the R on the big sunfish frame, and it's on both sides. And I tell you what, it's more palatable on this side because there's no bomb shield going on here. This side would have looked a whole lot better without the bomb shield, even with the R. But it would have been even better with neither the shield nor the bolster stamping. And you got they call it a cleaver blade. I call it a modified sheepfoot. And it's something that's really interesting on a sunfish. You don't see that very often on a sunfish. And then the secondary blade is a Wharncliffe blade. which is also pretty cool. And I tell you what, if they were to come out with this knife exactly as it is, with the R on the bolster and the bomb shield still in place, and swapped out this cleaver blade with a spear blade and left the Warncliffe blade on the backside here, I would go ahead and buy this knife again with a spear blade. That's how much I like the blue bone, and that's how much I like sunfish. So this is a knife that I'm keeping in spite of the R, simply because of that blue bone and because it's kind of a interesting sunfish. You just don't see cleaver blades on a sunfish or a Warncliffe blade on a sunfish. So that's why this knife is definitely staying with me. And then the final knife that's staying with me is all the way there in the back, and that is this one here. And this one is kind of a puzzler for me because they call this the pin blade trapper. It's not the normal size for a trapper. Trapper is usually either 3 7/8 of an inch or something like that. This one comes in right around 4 3/4 of an inches, so it's not even a mini trapper. And the reason they call it a pin blade trapper is because it has a pin blade in place of the spay blade. Actually, the pin blade is in place of the clip blade, because the clip blade's usually in front and the spay blade's in back. They got the pin blade in front here, and then in the back they got a California or Turkish clip going on, which is also a nice little blade going on. They got the swedge going on and everything else. Nice slim blade and a nice slim handle. I like to just call it my Turkish clip jackknife instead of calling it their pin blade trapper. I call it my Turkish clip jackknife. Again, the knife would look a whole lot better without the shield and without the R. It would be better if just either it had the shield or the R, but preferably it would be better with neither, because it's really got the wonderful brown stag bone and it looks really great. So this is probably one of the few, other than this one, the other brown stag bone with the R cub lockback. These two might end up being all the knives that represent the Rough Rider brown stag bone with a big R. And that might be all of the knives that I plan on keeping with a big R on the bolster. Any other ones that I have will probably go off to other people, or I'm going to end up selling them, because I really just don't care that much for them. And why keep them if I don't care for them? There's other people out there who will want them and will enjoy them, and that's my plan, is to just dump them. Any case, I'll let you go. Talk to you again soon.
Thanks for dropping by Knife Chats with Tobias. Don't forget to give us that thumbs up, leave a comment below, and subscribe and ring that notification bell so you know when the next episode is up and online.